Hi everybody, welcome to the June Home Sewn video. Today we're going to be working on this one here with the trailer. Before we jump in, I wanted to give you a quick sneak peek of Home Sewn Volume 2, which will be linked below. Volume 2 is now available. We've got July, August, and September. This is a downloadable product. You can print the instructions and all the files are delivered to your digital library. Here's some quick little drawings of the 3 tiling scenes we'll be making, and I will be continuing with this video series. Here's July, August, and September. If you bought the embellishment kit, the little mini quilts for all of these are included. There was a correction to the flags. I'm going to refer you to Kimberbell customer service and the Kimberbell Facebook page for that. I think everybody's already aware of that, but that's where you can find more information. Kimberbell has provided me with Home Sewn Volume 2, and it looks like we're going to be using some woven leather and some butter yellow embroidery felt. Get ready to embroider along with me for Home Sewn Volume 2. Before we start Volume 2, we're going to finish Volume 1. I have a quick note to clarify. I had a couple of questions about this when you're assembling the tiles. Page 35 has this great picture. It shows the batting tack down in black, the seam line in red, and a fabric placement and trimming line in green. This is where you can see that seam line. A couple people were looking for the seam line. Have a look at this picture that really clarifies it. The trailer as shown is in blue and orange. Mine's going to be different. You can see I've got chicken scratch all over the place. I've eliminated one color. I've changed a lot of colors. As we work through it, I will call out the color according to the instructions, and if I've made a change, I'll hold up and I'll show you my color that I've changed it to. My trailer is going to be pink and purple. I have all my fabrics prepped and I have all my threads ready. You can see I've filled up my rope bowl here. This is a hand-dyed embroidered bottom rope bowl. I've shown that before. I'll go ahead and link that below. I've got fairy frost for my trailer, the felt and the micro velvet over here, the little mini quilt, and we're going to do something different with the hang ties on the back this time. It seems like a lot of us are having difficulty getting that right. I'm going to try something with ribbons. We'll see if it works out. I've got my backing fabric here, and you might have noticed this roll of black fusible. I have this in my stash, and since I'm using black for the background, I went ahead and fused the black on the back. I've got all my batting ready. We are ready to start over at our machine. I'm on a Baby Lock Meridian. My files are on USB. We're working on June Home Sewn today. We're going to start with tile number 1. I like to go in order. The instructions call for the color shadow. I'm going to be using black thread in place of shadows. Get whichever thread you're going to use loaded, and we're going to work through the background quilting. Got my black thread on my machine, 5x7 hoop. I'm using the HBI no-show mesh stabilizer. I've shown that before. If you've got Kimberbell light mesh cutaway, you want to use that. These are the needles that are on my machine, the Schmetz 8012 Super Non-Stick Needle. I'm going to go ahead and work through the background quilting. We've done this several times before. If you need to see it slower, go back to April's video. And I'll just do this step for tile number 1. For the rest of the tiles on this video, I'll do the background quilting off camera, and we'll start after that step is complete. But let's work through our background quilting for tile number 1. The quilting is stitched out, and even though I put a black fusible on the back, I think I'm getting some pop through from the batting. I can see little white dots here and there. I think when it's all done, it's going to look okay. Sometimes no matter what you do to prep, things just don't go quite as planned. We're going to switch to the color linen, and we're going to stitch out the stars and moons fill. Instead of linen, I'm going to be using this glow in the dark white thread. I use this for my candy corn quilt shop. I'm going to put that on my machine, and we'll stitch out the stars and moon. Once your stars and moon have stitched out, we're going to switch to the color camel and stitch out the branch fills. Next is the color sage. We're going to stitch out the tree fill. Our last step is with the color soldier green, and we're going to stitch out the tree details. We're done with our first tile. I'm going to take this off my machine and set it aside. We'll trim everything together at the end. We're going to move on to tile number 2. Let's go ahead and load our file. I'm going to go ahead and work through the background quilting on this, and then we'll pick up together on step number 6, which is the stars fills. We're going to stitch out the stars fill. I'm going to do that again with the glow in the dark thread, and this is a sim thread. We're going to switch to sage green. We want to stitch out the pine tree placement line. Placement line has stitched. We're using the micro velvet for the pine tree. When I cut this, I made sure that I had the nap running this direction. See how nice that looks? And when you rub the other way, it changes the color. So the nap is running down on both pieces. Remember, you're stitching out a tiling seam. Even if you cut it wrong, if you cut it sideways, then cut it sideways for the piece underneath. Just keep it consistent. We want to cover the placement line. I'm going to add some tape, then we'll stitch the tack down and trim everything outside of the tack down line. I've got that all trimmed. This does have a decorative outline stitch, so no worries if you can't get into the little tiny crevices and exactly follow that stitch line. We're going to go ahead and stitch out the pine tree decorative outline. We're going to switch to soldier green, and the last thing we're stitching out is the tree detail. It looks like it's gonna just stitch this tiny little thing. We're all done with tile 2. Let's move on to tile 3. Let's load tile number 3. This block has a lot more stitching. This is a 49-minute stitch out. We've got a lot of fill going on with the plant. Check your bobbin. Make sure you've got a nice full bobbin. I'm going to go ahead and go through the background quilting off camera. I'm using black. The instructions call for the color shadow. The background quilting is done. I'm using the color black. The instructions have the color shadow. Whichever color you're using, leave that on your machine. We're going to stitch out the trailer placement line. It's going to stitch in this corner right here. You want to grab your trailer fabric. It should have fusible on the back. I am using Fairy Frost by Michael Miller. I'm using this nice pink. I had a video where I showed all my colors ahead of time for this project. I'll link it below in case you haven't seen that. And it has us stitching the tack down line in the same color, so either shadow or black in my case. Go ahead and stitch the tack down, and then you'll trim everything outside the tack down line. We've got one little star to stitch out. I have my glow in the dark thread on my machine. The called for color is linen. Next, we're going to stitch out the trailer siding detail. That's in linen. This is the color I'll be using for that. Switch to lead gray. We're going to stitch out the trailer frame details. Next, we're going to stitch out the trailer satin outline. It calls for Tidewater in the instructions. I picked this color pink for my trailer. We're going to switch to the color sage, and we're going to stitch out the rear tree fill. We're going to stitch out the branches next. Use the color camel for this step. We're going to switch back to sage, and we're going to stitch out the front tree fills. Next, we're going to switch to soldier green for the front tree details. That was a long stitch out. I blew through a bobbin on that one. I hope you've got some other Kimberbell projects sitting nearby. It's a great time to cut things and prep things and get some stuff ready to stitch when you have those really long stitch outs. Once the tree is stitched out, you can put silver on your machine, and we're going to stitch out the light strands detail, and then after that military gold, and we're going to stitch out the lights fills. I'm going to go ahead and run those two steps together. First silver and then gold. Everything has stitched out for this tile. We're going to move on to tile number 4. Let's load tile number 4. I'll do the same thing. I'll go ahead and work all the way through the background quilting. The background quilting is done. We're getting ready to stitch the trailer placement line. I want to show you this. We did tile 3 already, and when we stitched the trailer placement line, it's marked in the darker color shadow, and I'm using black, so I stitched it in black. Now we're on tile 4. Stitch the trailer placement line. They have it marked as linen. I guess pick whichever color you want. I used black before. Here's the piece from tile 3 where I used the black for the placement and tack down. I think it's fine. I don't see any problems with that. I've got black on my machine. I want to be consistent. If I would have used linen for this, I think I would have used linen for the rest. But since I started using the black here with my trailer placement and tack down, I'm going to continue to do that throughout the project. I'm going to keep the black on my machine for the trailer placement and the trailer tack down. So I'll stitch out the placement, place my fabric, tack it down, and trim. I've got that tacked down and trimmed. Now I'm going to change to linen. The next thing we're going to stitch out is the door placement line. We want to grab our door 4 fabric. Mine's sparkly purple, more fairy frost. Place it right side up, covering those placement lines. Stitch the tack down and then trim. Once you've got that trimmed, you can stitch out the windows placement line. Windows fabric, cover the placement line. I had to take mine to the window. I couldn't tell which side was up and which side was fusible. They're so close together in color. Going to stitch the tack down and then trim. The next 3 steps are all in linen. We have a windows decorative outline, and then the siding detail, and then the door satin outline. They're 3 separate steps on your machine. I'm going to go ahead and run them together. Next, we're switching to the color camel, and we're going to stitch out the tree trunk fill. Want to switch to sage green. We're going to stitch out the placement line for the pine tree. We've got our green micro velvet for that. Double check your nap. Make sure it's going the same way as the piece we already did on the earlier tile. Tape it into place. We'll stitch the tack down, we'll trim, and then we'll stitch out the decorative outline. So don't worry if you don't get your trimming into all the tiny nooks and crannies, because it's got a decorative outline. Next we have the pine tree details in soldier green. Switch to lead gray, and we're going to stitch out the trailer frame detail. Next is our trailer satin outline. I'm using pink. The instructions call for Tidewater. And our last 2 steps are the silver and military gold, the light strand, and the lights, just like the one before. I'll go ahead and run this together. Tile 4 is all done. My trailer's looking very sparkly. Let's go on to tile 5. Let's bring up tile number 5. I already have my black thread on my machine. I'm going to do the same thing, go all the way through the background quilting. The background quilting is done. We're going to start with the ground placement line. It has that in the color shadow. I'm using black. Let's stitch out our placement line. Grab your ground fabric. You should have 2 pieces. They're the exact same size. Grab one, cover that placement line. Then we're going to stitch the tack down and then trim. I've got that all trimmed. We're going to stitch the trailer placement line. This time it shows it in shadow. I'm going to go ahead and stitch it out in black. We want to go ahead and cover that placement line with our trailer fabric. I'm going to tack it down and trim. We've got a new color, steel blue. This is the color I picked for steel blue. I think the real steel blue is a little bit more gray. We're going to stitch out the placement line for the stream. We've got our felt for the stream. You want to make sure to cover the placement line. I would tape that in a couple of spots so it doesn't slide. Then we'll tack it down and trim. There's no detail stitching around this. It's a raw edge applique, so we'll trim it as nice and neat as you like. I've got that all trimmed. We've got another new color, timber. We're going to use this for the next 2 steps. I'm going to run them together. We're going to stitch out the ground, satin outlines and details, and then the logs 1 fills. Next is the color camel, and we're going to stitch out the tree trunk fills. It looks like this is the longest part of this stitch out. The tree trunk is stitched out. We're going to leave this color on our machine and stitch out the logs 2A fills. Switch to timber and stitch out the logs 2B fills. Next you want to switch to putty, and we're going to stitch out the logs 2C fills. Going to switch to the color marmalade and stitch out the dark flames A fills. Switch to military gold for the light flames fill. Switch back to marmalade, and we're going to stitch out the dark flames B fills. Switch to linen. We're going to stitch out the trailer siding details. We're going to stitch out the trailer satin outline. I'll be using pink. You can use Tidewater or whatever color goes with your trailer. Switch to lead gray. We're going to stitch out the trailer frame detail and the trailer bumper fills. 2 steps on your machine. I'm going to run it together since it's the same color. And the last step for this block is switching to sage, and we're going to stitch out the grass. We're all done with this tile. I'm going to put the black thread back on my machine. We're going to load tile number 6. That's the last one we have to stitch out. Let's go ahead and load tile number 6. This one's kind of a long stitch out. Check your bobbin. I'm going to go ahead and go through the background quilting. My background quilting is all stitched out. I'm going to leave black on my machine. You may have shadow on your machine. We're going to stitch out the ground placement line, and this is going to be just like the tile we just did. So stitch out the ground placement line, place your ground fabric, tack it down, and then trim. I'll go ahead and run those steps together. Next, we're going to stitch out the trailer placement line, place our trailer fabric, tack it down, and trim. They show that in shadow this time. I'm going to go ahead and leave the black on my machine, and I'm going to run all those steps together. Once you've got that trimmed, you want to switch to linen. We're going to stitch out our door placement line. To grab your door fabric, my door is sparkly purple. Cover that placement line, stitch the tack down, and then trim. Next, we're going to stitch out the windows placement lines. We want to cover the placement lines with our window fabric. I'm going to double check and make sure that it's visible side down, fabric side up. Then we're going to stitch the tack down and trim everything outside the tack down lines. Once you've got all of that trimmed, we're going to stitch out the door, window, decorative outline, and the trailer siding details. Those are both stitched in linen. I'll go ahead and run those together. Switch to the color timber. We're going to stitch out the ground details. Switch to the color camel, and we're going to stitch out the tree trunk fill. Our next 2 steps are in black. We're going to stitch out the trailer jack fills and the little sewing machine in the window. I'm going to run those 2 steps together. The next 4 steps are in lead gray. We're going to stitch out the window details, and it does show us it goes up, around, and over. So it looks like it only goes around one part, but we're going to come back later and there's going to be more fill, so don't worry if it looks kind of weird. After the windows detail stitches out, we're going to stitch out the trailer tongue fill that's going to go up there by the trailer hitch, and then the trailer frame detail, and then the door handle detail. These are just stitching, no applique. I'm going to go ahead and run them all together. all those steps have stitched out, we're going to switch to the color linen and stitch out the door satin outlines. Next, we're going to stitch out the trailer satin outline. I'm using pink. You can use Tidewater or whatever color matches your trailer. The next thing we're going to stitch out are the window satin outlines. This window here and the tiny window up near the front. They use the color Mango Smoothie. It's an orange color. It matches the color of the door fabric they use. I'm going to use this purple to go with my purple door. We're going to switch to lead gray, and we're going to stitch out the trailer steps right under the door, and then we'll stitch the wheel well fill. There are 2 steps on the machine. I'll go ahead and run them together. Next, we're going to stitch the tire fill with black. I hope I don't have to go anywhere in that tire. It looks a little rough. My tire didn't stitch out very well. I can see the brown fabric poking through here underneath. I kind of wish this would have been embroidery leather. I think it would have looked a bit nicer. Let's go ahead and switch to lead gray. We're going to stitch out the hubcap. We're going to switch back to black and stitch out the hubcap detail. And the last step is to switch to sage and stitch out the grass fills. We're all done stitching. I may try and see if I can pull out some of these threads from the ground fabric that pulled through, and if that doesn't work, maybe get a black Sharpie. And then my bobbin ran out over here by the stairs, so I've got a little thread sticking up. I want to look at those 2 things. But we're going to trim our blocks and assemble our quilt top. Before we trim our blocks, I thought I'd show everybody I did use a black Sharpie. It did bleed through a little bit on the gray stitching here, but I think it looks better than it did. I'm going to get this out of the hoop and set it aside. We're going to work on trimming our blocks. We've got all 6 of our tiles complete. Everything came out really nice. I'm looking forward to putting this together, especially the pink camper. Let's talk a little bit about assembly. I showed this briefly at the beginning. Page 33 has this picture showing the batting tack down, the seam line, and the fabric placement and trimming line. If you cut directly on the fabric placement and trimming line, you're giving yourself a 1/4 inch seam allowance. One thing that I'm going to do today, because I finally remembered to leave myself a note, is any outside seam, instead of cutting directly on that line, I'm going to give myself another 1/4 inch outside of that. That's going to give me extra space for my binding. I've been finding that when I cut right on the line and I put everything together, and I bring around the binding, I'm catching things that are close to the edges. Like the tree here. My binding would probably come up and end up covering part of the tree. So I'm going to give myself 1/4 inch extra on the outside edges. All of the inside seams, like here, 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 and then the inside seams here, I'm going to go ahead and continue to cut right on that trimming line for the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Since this is the 3rd video in the series, I'll cut one of my tiles, and I'll cut this one. This is the corner tile, tile number 2. So when I trim this one, I want to leave myself extra up here and on this side. I don't want to forget which seams I need to have extra. So that's your right hand side and the top. Let's go ahead and turn this over. I can cut right on this line and right on this line. This is a Creative Grooves ruler. It's the 2.5 by 12.5. What's nice is there's a 1/4 inch line right here. And if you actually line it up on this second line, which is the seam line, you can line it up there straight up and down, and then you can line up straight up and down here. And then this outside line where I'm going to trim should be lined up as well. So this is lined up. I can see this is over the seam line and this is over the line here, so I know I'm cutting straight. I'm going to go ahead and cut there. And then I'm going to cut the other side here the same way. And then we'll cut the sides where I'm leaving a little bit extra. Make sure that's nice and straight. Cut there. This is a little bit different compared to how I did the previous 2 tiling scenes. Instead of cutting right on that line, I'm going to use this 1/4 inch line and give myself a 1/4 inch extra for my binding. I don't think I need a 1/2 inch. I can line up a straight line here, make sure that's straight, make sure that's straight. This is just going to give me extra room on the outside, so when I bring around my binding, I don't end up covering any of the detail on the edges. So same thing, lining up the 1/4 inch there. Go ahead and cut that. So you'll see from the front, I cut right on the line here, right on the line here, and then you can see the stitching here because I cut a 1/4 inch away here and a 1/4 inch away here. Now I don't have to worry that when I bring my binding around, I'm going to cover any of the tree. I'm going to go ahead and do that for all my tiles. I'm going to do that off camera. I've got everything trimmed and ready to assemble. Let's look at where we need to watch out for things matching. These two here, not a problem. As we're going down though, we've got the trees here that need to match. So you have this area and this area and here, your lights, and then you've got all the parts of the camper. I think the camper is going to be a little bit of a challenge because we have this siding detail, the lines. You can put it together 2 ways, just depends on how you think you'll get better results. You can do these two, and then these seams, or you can put these together like this, and then the seam down the center. I think I'm going to put this together the same way I've been assembling these. I do these, and these, and these like that, and then each row. When I'm putting them together, I've been having fairly good results by lining things up, like this one with the lights, looking at it, kind of rolling it together, and then I'll put a pin or a clip, and you'll need a pin or a clip here, and then here. I'll go to my sewing machine, and then I'll just do some basting stitches, really long stitches over those parts that have to match, and then I open it and I'll see, did it match or am I off? And if it's off and crooked, I pick it out and I'll try it again with the basting stitches. When it looks good, I go back over it, and I have a stitch length of 2 on my machine. I'm sewing on a Juki TL 2020 PE. And as far as trying to get everything to match up, I'll try it 3 times. If I seam rip it 3 times and I still can't get it to match, but it looks fairly good, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to go ahead and do the assembly off camera for all of this. I did do this on camera for the first video in the series, so if you want to see that, you can go back to that. I like the pinning and the basting stitches. I know some people like to use glue. I'm going to go ahead and get this all assembled. I'll bring that back, and then we'll do our backing, binding, and we're going to try something different for those hang tabs. Here's everything sewn together. Did an okay job matching things up. Some things like here and here matched up really easily. The trailer looks good, a little bit off here. Surprisingly enough, most of the siding lines matched up really well. This is matched up. Where I had the most trouble was the tree. This spot in particular, I actually did this 5 times. I broke my 3-time only rule. I just couldn't get it to match. I gave up. And down here, it's a little bit off. We're going to go ahead and get our backing ready, and we're going to talk about the hang tabs on the back. Here's my 2 previous home sews. The biggest problem I have with these is every time you want to take the quilt on and off, you've got to unscrew this. So today we're going to try something a little bit different. The first thing I need to do though is get my backing fabric ready. I grabbed a random cut off of backing. I hope this is wide enough. It's a big long rectangle. It says Elizabeth Hartman for Robert Kaufman paint box, and there's the design number. In case you like that, you can look that up. I'm going to just spread that out, grab my little mini quilt. That's definitely big enough. I'm going to use the 505 temporary spray adhesive. I'm going to spray the back of my project and then press it down. I'm going to go around and trim off any extra. You may have noticed this is a little shiny here in the middle. I ironed this after I sewed it together. I think I may have burnt the fabric where I got something on it. I'll have to wash that off later. Hopefully that'll come off. I've got the backing cut to size. Let's flip this over. The top of my piece is up here. Here's my little T-bar. I'm going to line up the bottom with the bottom of the quilt. I want to make sure it's straight too. I don't have it straight. There we go. Now it should be straight. And I'm going to try hanging ribbons on it this time. I'm going to pick that up, make sure I've got it where it needs to be. I'm drawing a line with water-soluble pen. Not rocket science for this because I'm going to be using ribbons. I have some extra ribbon. I found them in a drawer. I don't know what they came off of. They're tied on both ends. They're finished. They're really nice. I'm going to look for the center of my piece of ribbon, and then I'm going to attach it. I'm going to go to the sewing machine, and I want to sew right where that line is. So I need to put my pin like this and then lift this up. And I'll sew right there. I'll be able to see the line on my sewing machine. And these are plenty long. They're 25.5 inches long, but that's okay. They're scrap ribbon. We'll try this. We'll see if it works. The idea being I have more than enough ribbon, so even if I sew them on crooked, when I go to put them on the T-bar, I can either tighten or loosen them and make everything hang nice and even. I've got these sewn on. You can see I left on the black thread, and I don't think I sewed them evenly, but that's okay. What I want to do now is tape them out of the way because we're going to put on our binding. I've got these taped out of the way. I have my binding ready. I'm going to bind this in black. I do machine binding. I stitch it to the back, bring it around to the front, and stitch it down. I'm going to do that off camera. I've done that before in earlier videos, and I can also link a binding video for you below. I do need to make my mini quilt. For my other mini quilts, I've put binding around them. I don't want to do that this time. I don't want this to be bigger than the size that it needs to be, which is what happens when I add binding to it. We'll make this one according to the instructions. I need to cut on the lines of that mini quilt. I believe it's 3 inches square. This is a 3.5-inch square ruler. Yes, it's 3 inches square. So we're going to go ahead and cut on those marked lines and get this to 3 inches square. I do have 3 inches square of batting and backing. I'm going to take my mini quilt and place it over the batting. It tells us to use a straight stitch and to add any quilting we want to this. So you can go around all the little squares if you want. I think I may just run around the outside. I'm going to take this to my machine and add a little bit of quilting to that. I went ahead and added a line of stitching just around the outside. That is good enough for me. We want to take our mini quilt back fabric, place it right side down, solid, doesn't matter, on top like this. And then I need to go over to my machine. I have to leave an opening at the bottom and then stitch 1/4 of an inch all the way around. I've got that stitched down. It says we can clip corners, and then we're going to flip it right side out, and I'll have to close that opening. That came out pretty good. I'm pleased with that. Instead of hand stitching or tacking down the opening, I put in a small piece of stitch witchery and ironed that down to seal the seam. Before I did that, after I flipped it right side out, I ironed it from the back. Do you remember what I just said about possibly staining the front of my quilt on the black fabric? Are you ready for this? Apparently there was something on the bottom of my iron and I needed to clean my iron. Thankfully, this is the back and I did not iron this from the front because I probably would have ruined this cute little quilt. As is, that's how it's going to stay, at least for today. And just a quick side note, I do have some of this Faultless iron cleaner. This works great. I've used it before. Got the binding on. We'll take a look at it at the end. I want to try and clean that spot off. But let's get our mini quilt attached. It goes right here, and they show the string right here over that seam. So if you didn't perfectly match that seam, you're not going to see it. And the other part of the string over the tree. So if you didn't perfectly match that, you're not going to see that either. That's good planning. I like that. Let me go ahead and tie the little loops on the end. I did measure this at 6 inches. I think I'm just going to put knots this time. I feel like I need almost the whole length of rope. So instead of trying to get those little loops like on the previous quilts, I'm just going to go ahead and knot this off. This is a camper anyway, right? It's more rustic. Almost straight, which is fine because it's going to cover the fact that I didn't get my seam quite right there. This seam came out pretty good. We'll go ahead and glue that down. I'm using my Sure Cool Shot glue gun. It's been really good for all of these embroidery projects or any kind of project where you want to use hot glue but you don't want to worry about burning your fingers off. It is a hot glue gun. It's warm, but it's nothing like my high temperature Sure Bonder, which gets really, really hot. Go ahead, put a little there, glue that down, pull away all the glue strings, put our little clothespins on. And then after that, I'm going to take this and see if I can't wash that stain off the front, and then I'll come back and we'll try our hanging ribbons. Looks good. Well, I scrubbed. It's still wet. I cannot get that off. It's kind of sticky. I even tried scraping it and using tape to get that up. If you have any idea how to get iron goop off of your projects, leave me a comment below. I'd appreciate it. And leave me your favorite stain remover. Let's go ahead and get a look at it and try the hang ties. Aside from the stain, it looks really good. These are done in glow-in-the-dark thread, leaving the extra space for the the binding really helped. I didn't cut off much of the detailed embroidery. You know, a little bit of the trees got caught under the binding, but not as much had I cut it right on that trim line. I think that was a good move. The Sharpie trick on the tire worked out really well. Let's go ahead and flip this to the back. I'm going to remove my tape, and then we'll try tying this onto the stand and seeing how that goes. I'm going to open up the ribbons. Yeah, I have more than enough ribbon here, but that's okay. I'm going to make this even with the bottom, and then we'll just tie them on. That way, if it's crooked from the front, I can adjust the ribbons and make it hang evenly. Okay, let's go stand it up and see how I did. There we are, all tied on the stand. That is so much easier. I highly recommend ribbons on the back. You don't need a 25-inch piece like I use. That was way too long, but it's really easy to put ribbons on the back. This is so cute. I hope I can figure out a way to get that stain out. Even if I can't, it still looks good. Maybe I can get like an owl button or something and put it there. Let's go in for a close-up. There's the fun glow-in-the-dark moon and stars in the background quilting. I do have a little bit of poke through with the batting on the background quilting. It actually looks worse on camera than in person. It doesn't really look that bad in person. We've got our nice micro velvet tree, glittery, sparkly camper. I love my pink camper with the purple door. We've got our felt river, the fun mini quilt, and then our embroidered tree over here. This one came out great. Again, I highly recommend putting ribbons on the back to hang it with. It was super easy. That's the end of Home Sewn Volume 1. We've stitched out April, May, and June. Coming soon, we're going to start Home Sewn Volume 2, June, July, and August. I'll make sure everything is linked below for you. Thank you so much for making these mini quilts with me. Please like, subscribe, and share. Comments or questions, and your best stain remover, please leave it below for me. I sure would appreciate it. I'll be back next month with Home Sewn July. Thanks for watching. See you next time.